Hi, welcome to the Tobacco Online Policy Seminar, or TOP. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Dr. Travis Whitaker, a postdoctoral associate at Yale University School of Public Health. So TOPS is organized by Mike Pesco at University of Missouri, Sei Cheng at Ohio State University, Michael Darden at Johns Hopkins University, Jamie Hartman-Boyce at University of Massachusetts Amherst, and Justin White at Boston University. The seminar will be 1 hour with questions from the moderator and discussants. The audience may post questions and comments in the Q&A panel, and the moderator will draw from these questions and comments in conversations with the presenter. Please review the guidelines on tobaccopolicy.org for acceptable questions. Please keep the questions professional and related to the research being discussed. Questions that meet the seminar series guidelines will be shared with the presenter afterwards, even if they are not read aloud. Your questions are very much appreciated. This presentation is being video recorded and will be made available along with the presentation slides on the TOPS website, tobaccopolicy.org. I will turn the presentation over to today's moderator, Michael Darden from Johns Hopkins University, to introduce our speaker.
Thank you. So today we'll continue our winter 2025 season with a single paper presentation by Hojin Park entitled Estimating the Cross-Tax Elasticity of Tobacco Demand with Respect to Cannabis Taxation in the United States using Nielsen's retail scanner data. This presentation was selected via a competitive review process by submission through the TOPS website. Dr. Hojin Park is a postdoctoral scholar at the Center for Tobacco Research at the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center. His research focuses on health economics, substance use behavior, substance taxation, and policy analysis using quasi-experimental designs. His current work includes economic evaluation of cannabis excise taxes in the United States, examination of medical cannabis use and perception among cancer survivors and perception by cancer clinicians, and evaluating the impacts of basic pension reforms in Korea on older adults' health behaviors. He earned his PhD in economics from the University of Kansas in 2022. Dr. C. Shang is an associate professor at the Ohio State University and is a co-author on the study, and she will be answering questions in the Q&A. So Dr. Park, thank you for presenting for us today.
Hello, Michael. Thanks for the introduction. So let me share my screen first. Okay. Hello, everyone. So thanks for joining today's TOPS talk. So today I'm going to talk about our lab research titled the Estimating the Cross-Tax Elasticity of Tobacco Demand with Respect to Cannabis Taxation in the US using Nielsen retail scanner data. Basically, we try to use the cannabis tax standardized to evaluate the impact on other substance sales. So we want to estimate the cross-tax elasticity of tobacco demand in terms of cannabis taxation. So here we have a disclaimer slides. So this study was funded by the NIH NIDA funding through the PIC Chang, and this research used the Nielsen data for the analysis, but the findings are our own. Yeah, just to talk about the brief background of the study. So in the US, there are many states that introduced the recreational cannabis use following the medical cannabis legalization. So many states actually introduced this policy. So although this is a tobacco study, the cannabis use is also related to the substance use of tobacco products. So we think that it's important to study cannabis use and the impact of cannabis tax. So in the US, as of 2023, there were 24 states plus the DC that legalized the recreational cannabis. And the current cannabis use in the US is like 43% of adults have used the cannabis in 2021 among the young adults. And for the high schoolers, there were about 27.8% of them that have used the cannabis. And co-use of, like I just mentioned, the co-use of cannabis and other substances are not binary. So binge drinkers are more likely to use cannabis using the Colorado data since the legalization. And a study found that about 6.38% of US adults have co-used the cannabis and tobacco in 2021 using the NSDUH data. So for the cannabis and tobacco taxation share the similar frameworks. So taxation cannabis as tobacco has two purposes. The first would be to reduce the cannabis consumption for the public health objectives. And the other very reason would be to fund the government functions to provide services to citizens. Similar to e-cigarettes, for the cannabis, there is no federal guideline in taxing cannabis, particularly for the cannabis has not been approved for the federal, even for the medical purposes. So that has been classified, cannabis has been classified as the Schedule I drug, although I know there is some movement of revising that, but currently I believe it's still illegal products at the federal level. Because of that, there is a significant heterogeneity in state tax laws in taxing cannabis products. So at the given that time, let me say it this way. So like I just mentioned, e-cigarettes share the similar feature of cannabis taxation. So since there is a significant heterogeneity, the empirical analysis for cannabis was not easy. Similarly, for the e-cigarette product as well, each state may have developed different policy, but a recent study by Code et al. After their first edition of standardized e-cigarette tax, they developed the standardized e-cigarette tax variable to be used for the empirical studies. So recently, Code et al. 2024 paper developed and introduced the tax variables for both closed form products of e-cigarettes and the open form products of e-cigarettes. So we're going to also use that for our analysis to estimate the elasticities in addition to cannabis tax. So since the cannabis tax is similar to e-cigarette tax, the tax may be different across the states. We also developed the standardized excise cannabis tax measure, similar to e-cigarette taxes, standardized to evaluate the tax implications on consumption and relevant outcomes. So this is our lab study that has been published recently that, again, we just standardize heterogeneous cannabis taxes by the types and across time based on the cannabis flower products. So from that paper, we also provide a figure for the demonstration of the tax levels of the cannabis standardized based on Q1 2023. So as you can see across the states, the tax levels may differ significantly. So we're going to use this variation for our estimation. Okay, so let's, if we talk about the relationship among the multiple substances like a cigarette, e-cigarette, and cannabis, most studies have actually examined the relationship across the substances in a two-product system, simply saying, just comparing the two products, like a cannabis and cigarettes, and the relationship between cannabis and alcohol, and the cannabis and e-cigarettes. And we find that no studies have investigated a three-product system that incorporate the taxes and sales of each of the substance products. So in this study, we try to evaluate the relationship in a three-product system framework. So previous studies have focused on understanding the relationship between cigarettes and e-cigarettes. So first of all, studies found that cigarettes and e-cigarettes are economic substitutes while other studies also find they may be complements and there may be no significant relationship between the two based on their analysis. So we feel that the economic relationship may differ and is not in the concrete consensus yet. So there is still room to examine if those products are economic substitutes or complements. Although we admit that the evidence is more on the substitutability side at the moment based on the literature. But we think that there is still relationship remains empirically debatable, particularly based on the tax elasticity. If we move on to the some evidence related to the cannabis, because of the lack of cannabis price and tax data, there is not much studies that have examined this tax and price of cannabis impact on cannabis use itself and also other substances. Particularly due to the lack of standardized cannabis tax measure. But given our recent study that devised the standardized cannabis tax measure, this is now possible. So we're gonna try to estimate the impact of standardized cannabis tax on other substances. There's some evidence of how the prices or taxes or other products impact cannabis use. Like e-cigarettes and cannabis may be complements based on the variation of the e-cigarette tax increase. And other study found that cigarette and cannabis may be independent, and the cannabis and alcohol may be complements or substitutes. So there are some mixed research that it can be complements or substitutes based on the characteristics of the individual surveyed or examined. So if we also talk about the cigarette part, the cigarette tax has been seen as the most effective tobacco policy instrument to reduce the smoking prevalence. But studies find that the cigarette tax may be less effective in recent years. But still some study found that there is still some effectiveness. So we would also like to evaluate the effectiveness of the cigarette taxes as an instrument for reducing smoking as well. So we find that more evidence is needed. And so our existing studies using the standardized e-cigarette taxes based on the first edition, which did not distinguish for their e-cigarette tax variable closed form versus open system. There may be states with different tax implications. So we'd also, again, given the recent development of the second edition of standardized e-cigarette taxes, for covering both closed and open form taxes, we're going to use that to evaluate the e-cigarette tax impact on the sales as well. Importantly, no tax analyses have been estimated for cannabis products, again, due to the lack of tax information that in standardized form. So just to summarize the evidence gap, no existing studies have jointly studied the on and the cross tax or price elasticities in a three-product system. And no studies have used a seemingly unrelated regression to our knowledge, given the correlated errors in each of the substance consumption equation by taxes. And no studies have evaluated the novel tax measures of cannabis and e-cigarette. So for this study, for a research question, we estimate the on and cross tax elasticities of substance demand in the US. And what we're gonna do in this study will be, again, the first estimate the on and cross tax impacts in a three-product system. And for that, we're gonna employ the SUR, the seemingly unrelated regressions, to address the correlated error terms in each of three substance sales equation in response to taxes. So compared to estimating individual equation for each of substances, we're gonna do that at once, considering 3 different substances in response to the taxes using the SUR. And we will also evaluate the novel tax measures of cannabis and e-cigarettes. Again, for the e-cigarette taxes, we're gonna use the closed form e-cigarette tax and the open form e-cigarette tax. So I'm gonna now briefly talk about the data and what variables have been used. So for the outcome variables for the analysis, we have a cannabis sales data in the ons during 2014 to 2022. So this variable was derived from the state published data on the tax revenue and the cannabis sales in dollars. And our research team hand collected the data and cross-checked and contacted the state officials for the details of the tax revenue and the sales information. This variable is only available for the time period of the states that introduced the cannabis legalization, recreational cannabis legalization, and after they opened the legal dispensaries to sell the products. So we have a sales derived using the tax revenue variable. So we have the tax revenue in dollars variable from the state published data, and we just divide that by the standardized state level cannabis tax variable that we generated from our recent study. For the tobacco sales, again, for the outcome variable, we have a tobacco sales variable from the Nielsen scanner data during the same data period. Again, that are statements level data that we collapse the tobacco sales at the weekly level into statements level for generating this cigarette sales sold in sticks and the e-cigarette sales sold in count. For the independent variable, we have the variable of the standardized cannabis tax per flower ounce that we generated in a recent study. So we just to talk about a little about the variable itself, we standardized the different types of cannabis taxes into one unified continuous measure. Again, in terms of flower ounce, there may be different types of cannabis products, but since the flower products has been most common products that people use, and also that's the most common types of products that states chose to based on for their taxation. So we generate the variable in terms of flower ounce. Again, this variable as well is only available for the state's time period when the states opened the legal dispensaries. And also for the conversion or the standardization of the cannabis tax variable, most states have adopted the ad valorem tax. So for the tax conversion or tax standardization, we need to have the price information. So for the price information, we are again just collected based on the state published price data, or when those state published price data are not available, we use the cannabis benchmarks data that are proprietary wholesale price data we purchased for our study. So we have the price data, and the conversion standardization is only available when the price data are available. So the data itself may have some missing, but mostly we tried our best to have a best information for the tax variable. For the again, after all of this process, we generated the taxes based on varying prices. So this is a standardized cannabis taxes per ounce using time variant prices of cannabis. We chose to use the time variant prices unlike the e-cigarette case, because cannabis case, the prices and sales of cannabis are only available when the states open the legal dispensaries. So we found that the endogeneity between the price and taxes, if any, may be minimal. And also we also capture the trend of decreasing price and taxes that the market itself has not been much concentrated. So other independent variables will be the substance taxes of the cigarette tax and the standardized beer excise tax, and the standardized e-cigarette tax. Again, for the standardized e-cigarette tax is from the recent publication by Code et al. 2024 that differentiated by closed form and the open form e-cigarette products and the taxation. Finally, the data is statements level data set that covers 2014 through 2022. We have 16 states with the cannabis sales and the cannabis tax variable available. Again, these are the states that open the retail cannabis dispensaries. And we also added the state level per capita income and the seasonally adjusted unemployment rates, and all tax measures and per capita income variable were CPI adjusted using 2022 dollars. So the final samples will be varying between 500 or 600 in observations based on the specifications. We also introduced the alternative sample up to 5,000 observations. So this is when the alternative cannabis tax measure is used. Again, the cannabis sales or cannabis tax may be having some mixing observations based on their availability of the price information and whether the states open their dispensaries yet. So for some fuller sample for the cigarette and e-cigarette tax elasticity analysis, we introduced the fuller sample by using the alternative kind of tax measure that's valued 0 for the states that has not introduced the legalization policy or that has not opened the dispensaries to be effective. So here I have a summary stat. So I'm gonna pause a few seconds so that you could check out the numbers. Okay, so again, these are sales variables, are outcome variables, and these tax variables are the independent variables that we use in the analysis. So cannabis taxes, again, is a dollar value per flower ounce. And the e-cigarette taxes, we have 2 forms, like I mentioned, based on the Code et al. 2024 paper. Again, they are $1 per milliliter, differentiated by the closed form and the open form. So this figure just try to show some trend of tax and the prices, tax and price for the cannabis for the upper figure, and the lower figures for the trends of substance tax based on our analysis sample. So the upper figure is from our recent study. So we see that the cannabis taxes, tax and prices in either nominal or real measure that are okay. So for the real term is decreasing given the statistical significance. Although not significant, we see that in nominal term, the prices and taxes may be either stagnant across the time or the decreasing. So we see overall the decreasing trend of cannabis price and tax. If you look at the lower figures for the cigarette and the e-cigarette and the beer taxes trends, the blue one for the cigarette tax, we find that in nominal term, it may be increasing across the time, but in the real term is actually stagnant in value or is rather decreasing in recent time. So beer taxes have been pretty similar across the time. And for the e-cigarette tax, we see that the closed form taxes has been more increasing in recent years compared to the open form e-cigarette tax. So for the empirical strategy for our regression analysis, we use the typical two-way fixed effects model based on the difference in differences framework. So we have this equation to estimate substance sales. The outcome variable, again, can be cannabis, cigarette, or the e-cigarette sales. And our tax measure will be the independent variables to estimate the impact on the substance sales. So tax measures in dollar per unit of cannabis, cigarette, e-cigarette, and beer are used. And per capita income and unemployment rate, and the two fixed effects with the state level clustering. And again, so we first evaluate each of these substance cells individually, and then we also examine this in three variable system using the similarly unrelated regression framework to include all three equations at once for efficiency. So let me pause here for questions.
Thanks so much, Hojin. So our discussant today is Dr. Michael Pesco, a professor of economics at the University of Missouri.
Hi, Hojin. Thanks so much for a really interesting presentation so far. I guess like one of the main contributions of your paper, if I'm understanding it correctly, is that there has not been a paper that has studied the impact of cannabis taxes on cannabis sales or use. Is that correct?
Yes, that's one of the contributions.
Okay. I mean, to me, that seems like a really important research question, right? And I know that this is the tobacco online policy seminar, right? But I did kind of wonder if maybe there's two papers here, right? And I mean, we haven't gotten into your results or anything like that, right? But it just seems like the cannabis question seems so important, right? I'm sure there's a lot of states really wondering, you know, what, you know, so we've legalized, you know, marijuana, right? In some cases with referendums, right? And now, you know, what impact can we expect in taxes, right? In terms of reducing cannabis use, in particular for vulnerable populations, right? And on revenues, right? I mean, so that just seems like a hugely important a question. And so I do wonder if it's worth really digging in deep on that side of things, right? And the tobacco stuff in some ways, yeah, you know, that's important, right? But I feel like maybe that's like of second order importance, right? It might maybe is a follow-up paper or something like that. So right. A couple questions. One is how do you guys think about medicinal marijuana? I assume that all the recreational marijuana law states have medicinal marijuana available. Are there any price differences in medicinal marijuana that we should be aware of and that could be a confounder here?
I think so for the medicinal marijuana or policy to be analyzed. So based on our price data that we purchased for the price information that are not available, there are some differences in the price level of the medical marijuana versus the recreational marijuana or cannabis. But if you want to use the tax information, many states actually do not have the taxes on the medical products, so it's less consistent to use whether compared to the recreational case. So we have not touched on the medical part yet, but of course we could also extend our study to the medical part. Yeah.
So you know though if so some states do tax
some states do tax.
That's interesting. I mean, could you just include an indicator variable for if the state, I mean, if they all have medical marijuana, right? So, I mean, in theory, I think you could just include a dummy for if a state taxes it or not, right?
Right. Yeah, we could do that.
You know, just an idea. Something else, you know, thinking a little bit about the outcome, and I think that you guys are probably doing the best you can, right? I mean, my understanding is that your outcome is you have revenue, right? And so that must be reported tax revenue, you know, in different government reports, and I'm guessing you guys have to collect that, and which is probably not an easy undertaking, but you have that, and then you have your standardized tax, right? And so my understanding is that you're taking revenue and dividing it by the taxes, right? I mean, I guess one question, you know, thinking a little bit about, I think you have then the tax variable on the left-hand side and the right-hand side of your regression, right? So I mean, I'd have to think a little bit more about the implications of that, right? But also, you know, thinking about like what's some measurement error and what does that look like here, right? And I guess I'm wondering, questions like, reservations. I assume that there could be sales on reservations that do not lead to state revenue. And I don't know if that's common or not, right? I know there's a lot of tobacco literature, right, on purchases on reservations as ways to avoid taxes in places that don't have compacts, right? I don't know if we can expect that same kind of problem with marijuana sales or not. Yeah, I mean, I there could be other sources, but I guess I was just curious to hear from you if there's any other measurement problems that you can think of with the outcome, and if there's any other alternative outcomes that might consider.
Yes, we do. Like I mentioned, if you use the measure based on tax revenue, we technically could include the standardized tax on both sides. So given that we also have an alternative measure using the cannabis sales in dollar value of the cannabis sales for each state as available, we just divided that. Again, it's kind of similar, but we also divide that cannabis sales in dollar by the retail price per ounce. So that's alternative measure we have, and we found the similar findings when we use this outcome variable instead of the tax revenue derived. But yeah, given that we could also try to use some alternative measure, but at the moment we have just two variables. So yeah.
Maybe even something like, it's not the same thing, but I mean, you could, I guess, use survey data, right? I mean, and study the effect, and maybe you're doing that in other papers, right? I always think Google Trends is interesting, right? Just how often do people search marijuana, right? In
Okay.
Google, and did that vary at all based on the amount of the taxes, right, in the recreational marijuana law states? Just possible idea for alternative outcomes to flush out that first stage,
Okay.
if you will. And just one technical question: you're using a non-balanced panel? Is that that correct? And so once the state becomes an RML state,
Right, for the sales in Texas.
becomes part of your data.
Right.
Okay. It'd be interesting. It'd be interesting just some sensitivity around keeping the panel balanced, and I guess you won't have any legal sales, right, in the pre-period without RML, right? And just seeing the implications of that choice. But yeah, great.
Yeah.
Please continue.
Yeah,
Or I'm going to turn it back to Michael Darden in case there's questions. Thanks.
Yeah, there's one question in the chat, but it looks like C is answering it. So why don't we get to your results just for time's sake? So go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so let me reshare. Okay, so this was our empirical model. So let's move on to the research part. Okay, so this is our main research using the two-way fixed effects estimation for the tax elasticities of the cannabis cigarette and the e-cigarette, respectively. So each of column here shows for the estimation for each of cannabis outcome, cigarette outcome, and the e-cigarette outcome. But the third and fifth columns are for the cases when we have the alternative cannabis tax measure, again, having the zero values for the time that have not yet opened the legal dispensaries or have not yet legalized the cannabis use yet. So we have 5,000 observations. Again, this is for analyzing the cigarette and the e-cigarette sales in a more fuller observation, more fuller sample, rather than the 500 or 600 as like a limited sample, given the cannabis tax and the sales variable availability. So if you look at the statistically significant estimates here, so for the first finding for the cannabis side, we see that the increase in cannabis taxes decreases the cannabis sales which is expected. But we see that so again, these estimates are all elasticity measure. So we have a negative 1.23 tax elasticity of the cannabis tax on the cannabis sales. So this means 1% increase in cannabis taxes will result in the 1.23% decreases in cannabis sales, which is elasticity. So we have a e-cigarette part. We have a e-cigarette taxes, closed form taxes. We see that increasing the e-cigarette tax will reduce the e-cigarette sales, which is expected again, but in an inelastic case. So we have a increase in 1% of the e-cigarette taxes for closed form will result in the decrease in e-cigarette sales by 0.17%. But we do not see impact on the impact of e-cigarette sales for the open form on the e-cigarette sales. So if you look at the cross tax elasticity in a blue color, for the e-cigarette case, we see that increasing cannabis taxes would increase the e-cigarette sales by 0.47 tax elasticity. So this is cross tax elasticity, and positive sign means cannabis and e-cigarettes may be substitutes. But for the cigarette case, we have a beer tax. If we increase the beer tax, the cigarette sales may be decreasing, which indicates the complementary relationship between beer and cigarettes. But our main focus is more on the SUR case. So we have a SUR result here. So for the table 3, we have a cannabis sales and the cigarette sales and the e-cigarette sales as outcomes in response to each of the taxes: cannabis taxes, cigarette taxes, e-cigarette taxes, and the beer taxes. So we see pretty similar. The elasticity estimates in bold are the own elasticity. We see pretty similar effect size of estimates as we've seen in the two-way fixed effects in the SUR case as well. Again, the red one is for the own elasticity, and the blue one is the cross tax elasticity estimates. But now we have a more significant estimates rather than two-way fixed effects case, because SUR case we address the correlated error terms across the 3 equations. So in the first column, if you look at the cannabis taxes impact, we see that increasing cannabis taxes will increase the cigarette sales and the e-cigarette sales, which shows the substitutability. In the third column, e-cigarette tax for the closed form, we see that increasing e-cigarette taxes will increase the cigarette sales. But in the e-cigarette taxes, often we see e-cigarette tax reduces the cigarette sales. So there is some differential implications of the e-cigarette taxes by the closed form or the open form. And the beer taxes, overall, beer taxes have the impact of the complementary to other substances. So this table shows the SUR result, but only looking at the cigarette sales and the e-cigarette sales. Based on if you look at the observation number, 5,000 observations, so here we use the alternative cannabis tax measure that had the values of 0 for the time that did not legalize or to open the dispensaries yet. So here we see that the own elasticities are all significant. If you look at the second column for the cigarette tax impact, we see that the inelastic elasticity on the cigarette sales by the cigarette tax. And the e-cigarette tax case, for the e-cigarette sales, we see the closed form e-cigarette tax and the open form e-cigarette tax have different impact again. So e-cigarette tax for the closed form decreases the e-cigarette sales, but on the other hand, for the e-cigarette tax for the open form, it increases the sales. We're going to touch on this, Richard, at the conclusion slides, but we see that the e-cigarette taxes and the e-cigarette products for the closed form or the e-cigarette products for the open form, there may be some substitutability. For the cross-tax estimates, we see pretty similar research. For the cigarette and the e-cigarette, we see a complementary impact, and the e-cigarette taxes and cigarette, we again see the complementary impact, and beer taxes, again, the complementary impact on the other substances. So we also try to do some event study for the differences framework using the DCDH, because our the treatment variable is a continuous variable, which is tax in different substances. We tried our best, but we see that the research are pretty consistent with the two fixed effects finding, but they are quite noisy. So we just try to show that we try this, but we wanted to develop further for the event study for our framework. But if you look at the cigarette sales case, in terms of cigarette taxes, we see no significant effect before the taxes are changing or treated, but there is no impact after there is a change in tax level. For the e-cigarette tax impact on the cigarette sales as well, there was no impact before or after the treatment is binding. But we want to say is we're going to try to examine further for the event study for better verify our research framework. So here we would like to provide the conclusion slide. The research question was, again, the estimating the tax elasticities of tobacco and cannabis sales in the United States. In summary, we find that for the own tax elasticities, cannabis sales are tax elastic with minus 1.22 estimates of tax, and cigarette sales in the two-way fixed effects model to be non-responsive to its own tax, although with the inelastic estimate of tax, but for the inelastic in case of SUR research. So the cigarette taxes still reduces the cigarette sales. For the e-cigarette sales, this is more interesting part that may respond to the taxes, but on the different systems differently. So we see that for the closed system, e-cigarette tax actually reduces the sales, which is expected, but we see a positive sign for the e-cigarette taxes based on the open system. So we understand this feature as because the Nielsen data captured mostly the e-cigarette sales of closed system, and the open system, closed system, maybe open and closed system e-cigarette products may be economic substitutes. There is a different impact of taxes by the closed form or the open form tax on the e-cigarette sales. So based on Nielsen data, this is a sales outcome maybe more on the closed form e-cigarette products. And this shows that relationship between the closed form sales and the closed form tax. But we see a different sign on the impact of the open form e-cigarette tax. For the cross-tax elasticity, we see that cannabis products may be substitutes to cigarettes and the e-cigarette based on our SUR finding, SUR research. But in the direction of cannabis taxes to impact the tobacco sales, rather than a previous study that examined the impact of e-cigarette taxes on the cannabis use. So this is, I think, one of the contributions of our study. And we found the mixed research on the cigarette versus e-cigarette relationships likely there may be complements based on our findings. So this adds to the debate of whether they are economic substitutes or complements. So the most studies found there may be substitutes, with some studies finding the e-cigarettes may be complements. But our finding is more on the complementary side between the cigarette and the e-cigarette. So a systematic review found that there is actually the evidence that the cigarette and e-cigarettes using sales data may be inconclusive. So maybe the use of different data set in different framework may result in different economic relationship, but our finding is on the complementary side. And beer taxes in all the regressions for the SUR3 fixed effects model tend to be economic complements to other substances. And this is consistent with the findings. So this is our final slide. For the future research, these findings, our study's finding is currently a preliminary stage. So we need a further investigation. So for the future approach, we would like to introduce the e-cigarette sales variable in e-liquid format, and also categorized by the types of e-cigarette products to have a further investigation of the findings. And also for the sales variable itself, we have overall sales for entire state given time period, but we would also like to try to use the per capita consumption for sales for each of substances that may have a different tax implications. And for the beer and alcohol consumption, that we would also like to consider for the outcome variable. Also, like the e-cigarette tax cases, we would like to also update the coverage of the cannabis taxes and sales data for a larger sample. And also, we could also examine the price elasticity using the instrumental variable framework, using the taxes as instrument. So overall, we need to do some further investigation, including the event study framework. So this is all of our presentation slides. So thanks for any comments or suggestion. Yeah, let me stop here.
Thanks so much, Hojin. I guess we'll go back to our discussant, Dr. Pesco. If you have any further comments, questions?
Yeah, thanks again for a super interesting presentation. I really liked, there was a table in there, I don't know if it's possible to go back, but column 1 with showing the negative effect that cannabis taxes had on cannabis sales, and then showing the positive effect they had in cigarette and e-cigarette sales. Yeah, I thought this column 1 here was this is a really important result, I guess, right? I mean, so thinking about like, how do we flesh out this further, right? And I know that you're doing a lot with, the other columns, looking at other tobacco product outcomes, right? And looking at those coefficients, right? But we really could dig into column 1 carefully too, right? And including doing some event studies on it. I know that you proposed some sensitivity checks that you guys are planning in the future. I guess this is using the seemingly unrelated regression. Like, I would be interested just to see, regular linear, modeling without that. What implication is there of of using the seemingly unrelated regression, right? And I think you also showed some event studies from using the newer DCDH estimator, right? Maybe that could be an alternative way to estimate this result as well, right? So a nice work with this. For the if you go one slide further, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe next slide. Maybe next slide. Sorry. Okay, it's okay. The point, I guess, was there was at one point I think you had closed system e-cigarettes and you had all 51 states, right? And then I thought you had open system without 51 states, although that's different than what I'm looking at right here. But I was wondering if maybe you were only using states that had open system e-cigarette taxes at some point.
Okay.
I think that you might have an ability, like if a state does not have a separate open system e-cigarette tax, then I think that the closed e-cigarette tax rate equals the open system tax rate, right? So it might be possible to not restrict your sample just to those states that have open system e-cigarette taxes. And I guess one other minor comment. I think you're using the Nielsen IQ data, and I know I was involved with some work with authors from Truth Initiative, and we were using Nielsen IQ, and I've separately done work using Nielsen retail scanner data from the Kilt Center. And we noticed in our own work that there were big differences in terms of tax elasticities between which versions of the Nielsen data source is used.
Okay.
And I think that there's the Nielsen IQ, they use some kind of projection factors to try to estimate what they think the market looks like, right? Whereas the Nielsen retail scanner data, they're providing like the store level raw data without any kind of projections, right? And so I was just, I've wondered before, how were they doing these projections exactly? And are they projecting in a way that makes tax responsiveness basically fall to almost nothing? So just something to think about a little bit with respect to your own work.
Okay. Yeah, that's really good point.
Yep, nice job. And I'll turn it back over to Michael Darton.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks, Hojin. We don't have any questions in the Q&A that haven't been answered. So I'll ask a question just on the system, seemingly unrelated regression. So you make a nice case for including beer taxes in your system for reasons of complementarity between marijuana and alcohol potentially. Can you just give some intuition as how you think the results of your system would change if you also modeled beer consumption or alcohol consumption directly? So you had a four dependent variable system.
Right.
And I mean, I'm not suggesting that you model everything under the sun, but alcohol seems like a natural one to include here. So can you give us a sense as how your results might change?
I think the benefit of using the SUR, to my understanding, is just to better control for the error terms in each of the equation for the substances. So in this case, like I mentioned, where we understand there are some relationship with the beer and the other substances. So including the beer cells as available in the model for the SUR may actually changes the standard errors. So I think that may be the most benefit we could get out of the SOR. But I cannot just say it will just reduce or increase the statistical significance, but it will better, the use of SOR will better control for the standard errors, particularly for the correlated the errors across the models for each of substances. So that's our understanding. But again, I cannot say it will change this way or that way at the moment. Yeah.
And then just a question that's I think somewhat related to your work, but maybe not completely. But like, do we have any estimates in the literature of the substitutability between kind of black market marijuana and legal marijuana? So when taxes go up, when taxes go up in the legal market, you could imagine that some users switch.
That's right. I think not from our search that we found any. So mostly the literature is like on the cannabis elasticity literature, mostly focused on the like a survey or some data from like a crowdsourced data for the black market, just because of lack of prices or tax information so far. So they're mostly either focusing on the black market itself, or based on the survey. So I haven't seen any
Yeah.
studies that did that, but we could also try to do that ourselves. But that's a really good point to understand the relationship between the black market response and the legal market by the prices and the taxes of the legal market. Yeah.
One question from the chat that's not related, but do you think about other kind of tobacco control laws like flavor bans or advertising restrictions or anything like that in your work? And could you?
Yeah, I think they are also relevant to include. So that's our, of course, future plan to do so. So far we have just tried to understand the primitive relationship between the major variables, but we could also add those policy changes in those like the flavors, product ban, or some other types of state level policies to include. So yeah, that's a valid point. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, we're 3 minutes away, so I think it's a good time to kick it to Travis, who will take us out. Thank you, Hojin.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
All right. So we're out of time, but thank you to our presenter, our moderator, and our discussant. And finally, thank you to the audience of about 113 people for all of your participation, and have a top-notch weekend.